Murder is not a choice. At least not one that any good society can allow to go unpunished. And yet, we allow at least 1 million murders to go unpunished every single year in this country. Which issue will you vote for in this next election that will be more important than whether or not we continue to sanction millions of murders in this country? Of course, I'm speaking of abortion. How many great physicians, scientists, inventors, and statesmen have been murdered over the last 40 years before they even had a chance to take their first breath? Chances are at least some of those millions of babies would have been important people, right? Wrong. All of them were important people. Their lives were valuable, not expendable. They were not an inconvenience. They were a gift. But we've thrown them out with the trash. Literally. According to Google, over the past 12 months in the US alone, there have been about 20 million searches for the search phrase "where to get an abortion." That's a pretty scary statistic, but this one is even worse. According to the GynPages.com website, each year over 1.5 million women have abortions. Sometimes abortion is the most empowering thing a woman can do, and over 30 million women have had abortions since it was legalized in 1973. Empowering? Is that really the word that we should be using to describe the gruesome procedure that we know as abortion? To murder your own baby? Empowering? Take note. Before I continue, you should know that if this video begins to get significant views, there's a pretty good chance that YouTube will likely pull it. They're not exactly lovers of free speech, at least not when a video contradicts their relatively liberal perspective on many important issues. It wouldn't surprise me if this video isn't available for long. This beautiful 20-week-old baby could be legally aborted today. Does this look like a fetus or a baby to you? How much more convenient to call it a fetus? This is an image of a dilation and evacuation abortion. And you can see, it may not be super clear in this video depending on the size that you're watching it at, but at 23 weeks, where it is still legally an option to abort a baby, the baby is more or less fully formed. Now, many babies at 23 weeks would have a hard time living outside of the womb without some pretty significant medical care, but with the technology that we have today, at many hospitals, that baby would live and would have a normal life, would not have any complications whatsoever later in life. But in this image, you can watch as a dilation and evacuation abortion procedure takes place. And in case that last image wasn't clear enough, this is a description of that procedure. The doctor grips a fetal part with the forceps and pulls it back through the cervix and vagina, continuing to pull even after meeting resistance from the cervix. The friction causes the fetus to tear apart. For example, a leg might be ripped off the fetus as it is pulled through the cervix and out of the woman. The process of evacuating the fetus piece by piece continues until it has been completely removed. Does that sound like the work of a doctor? It sounds a little more like a serial killer to me. In fact, outside of an abortion clinic, that's exactly what an individual who performs dozens to hundreds and maybe even sometimes thousands of such operations would be described as. And rightly so. Close your eyes and picture, just for a minute, this 21-week-old baby in the image here. The wide open eyes, the little toes and fingers. Picture yourself holding this baby in your hand as the person in this image is doing. Now picture yourself tearing her leg off, then the other, then her arms. Finally, tear her body away from her head. I'm sorry, that probably wasn't fair. And quite frankly, for those of you who are very visual, that image may not leave you for a while. And I'm sorry for that. But that is what we have allowed to happen to millions of babies in this country, and we call it choice. This is sworn court testimony of abortionist Dr. Martin Haskell. Typically, when the abortion procedure is started, we typically know that the fetus is still alive because either we can feel it move as we're making our initial grasps, or if we're using some ultrasound visualization when we actually see a heartbeat as we're starting the procedure. It's not unusual at the start of a D&E procedure that a limb is acquired first, and that limb is brought through the cervix and even out of the vagina prior to disarticulation, and prior to anything having been done that would have caused the fetal demise up to that point. In other words, the baby's not dead, and they're yanking these limbs off. When you're doing a dismemberment D&E, usually the last part to be removed is the skull itself, and it's floating free inside the uterine cavity. So it's rather like a ping pong ball floating around, and the surgeon is using his forceps to reach up and try and grasp something that is freely floating around and is quite large relative to the forceps we're using. So typically there's several misdirections and misattempts to grasp. Finally, at some point, either the instruments are managed to be placed around the skull, or a nip is made out of some area of the skull that allows it to start to decompress. And then, once this happens, typically the skull is brought out in fragments, rather than as a unified piece. And this guy calls himself a doctor. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't let this guy within 10 feet of my worst enemy. Only a psychologically deranged individual could do this day in and day out and actually take money for it. Location is the only distinction between abortion and murder. If the baby remains in the womb, even up to 24 weeks, a doctor can kill the baby by removing it piece by agonizing piece. But if a woman goes into premature labor and delivers a 23-week-old baby, the same doctor would be arrested for murder for the very same procedure. How ridiculous is that? That's like telling your doctor, "Come on in. As long as you dismember my son while you're in my house, it's okay. You'll be doing me a big favor. I'll even pay you. Just don't take him outside on the porch first. If you do it there, you'll get arrested for murder." But if you don't consider them a person, well, then you can hide the ridiculous and gruesome nature of it all. Don't call it a baby, which everyone instinctively knows is just a very little and very vulnerable person. Call it a fetus. Then you're just terminating an emotional and physiological inconvenience. This barbaric practice must stop now. Whatever we might think about the other ills in this country, and there are many that must be addressed, none can be more important than protecting the lives of millions of innocent and defenseless babies. There is no gray area here. This is a moral absolute that any good society must adhere to if they are to remain strong. All life is precious, and it must be protected.